Every F1 season has its heroes and villains. Sometimes they're drivers, sometimes teams, sometimes it's the governing body. In 2022 though, it was porpoising. Like the big bad wolf, it huffed and it puffed and it blew discs in every driver's back. The FIA has made some rule changes to try and fix the problem, and the teams have learnt from last year and developed it out of their cars. Or have they? People are starting to whisper that it'll be back with a vengeance, and we're going to find out if those whispers are true. If we go back to the start of 2022 real quick, you'll remember that porpoising was an incredible surprise to everyone. We were so excited for the pre-season tests to see what the new regulations brought about. Everyone was expecting incredible looking cars and inventive rule interpretations. No one was expecting porpoising. But should they have? The introduction of new technical rules and regulations, including the return of ground force aerodynamics, led to the return of the phenomenon not seen in the sport since the 1980s. Uneven track surfaces caused the underfloor's seal with the ground to be broken intermittently while running on high-speed straights, meaning the car momentarily popped up and lost grip, affecting overall speed and handling. If you were a Mercedes driver, the problem was so bad it was happening in the corners as well. It's pretty incredible they managed to get the effect to happen as much as it did, really. In the past, this effect would have been countered by active suspension, dynamically changing the car's ride height, or by a physical skirt stopping air from escaping. But that's no longer allowed by the rules. Red Bull was largely unaffected, perhaps thanks to the knowledge and experience of Adrian Newey, who was working in the sport during the original ground effect era. Formula One's Chief Technical Officer Pat Symonds admitted that porpoising had never been on their radar in the run-up to 2022, while Director of Motorsports Ross Brawn said he was surprised teams hadn't foreseen the problem in pre-season wind tunnel tests. Formula One management and the FIA were obviously aware of what happened last time ground effects were legal. I would imagine they looked back at the rules from the 80s before creating the rules for 2022. You can't blame them for expecting the teams to do the same thing, or at least be aware of what ground effect flaws can do. McLaren's technical director James Key said that Formula One should have anticipated the problem when it was devising the new regulations, but admitted that it was one of two crucial aspects of the rule changes that teams had failed to anticipate. I guess the two things which were less obvious to us. One was the porpoising, which we all missed, he said. If we were old enough to be about in the 80s and remember the last time it was the problem in the 70s, we probably would have been a little bit more wise to it. But actually, we all missed, let's say, the potential for that to be as severe as it was at the beginning of the season, he acknowledged. It tended to take up more time than we expected to solve. They weren't the only team that thought porpoising wouldn't be a problem though. Mercedes were caught especially off guard by it due to how they planned their car development. They chose to not run their actual race car spec at the first 3-day test in Spain. Despite their car having bouncing problems then, they assumed the change to their side pods would resolve it, but when the Bahrain test began, their arrogance was punished. Their suspension was incapable of dealing with anything other than a perfectly flat surface, forcing them to raise their ride height and suffer the consequences, huge downforce losses and increased drag. The question for 2023 will be, have they learnt their lesson? Have they adjusted their simulations and how they work in the factory to take into account the phenomenon? Or will we see them bouncing around Bahrain again at the end of February? The technical changes for 2023 will require the teams to stiffen their floors to stop flexing under load, and some workarounds that allow them to cheat wear tests. They will also have to raise the height of their floor edges. It's been estimated that these changes will cost the teams somewhere around 12 to 15% of the downforce their floors are creating. In reality though, due to development over the winter, the downforce being produced is likely to be equal to what it was last year anyway. All the changes have really done is slow down the rate of performance gain. The FIA themselves has said that while they expect the rule changes to slow the teams down, they don't think there'll be a change in lap time when we actually get to racing in Bahrain in March. Despite the tweaks planned for 2023, FIA Tech Chief Nicolas Tombazis has admitted it remains to be seen whether there'll be enough to completely eradicate porpoising, or if the issue will need to be further addressed in the future. Whether we have done enough with this change to stay away from it, or whether porpoising will reappear anyway, we don't know at the moment either, and it will have to be seen during the season. Mercedes are especially susceptible to porpoising due to their unique zero-pod design. The lack of a large side pod travelling along the rear of the car leaves a large amount of the floor exposed to forces from above. Though the team says that the side pods aren't the only reason they suffered more than others, they definitely didn't help. Mercedes have confirmed that the zero pod will return for 2023, so they'll be susceptible to it again. Some teams are preparing for it to return, and Aston Martin are actively expecting it to be evident on some cars come the Bahrain test. Aston Martin suffered quite harsh bouncing effects early in the season, but they were able to make changes to the cars to limit the phenomenon as the season went on. But despite the changes being made to help combat the issue, Aston Martin Deputy Technical Director Eric Blandin predicts his team and others will struggle to get rid of porpoising altogether, simply as a matter of physics surrounding the new era of F1 cars. It won't disappear completely, Blandin said. It's something that's inherent within this set of regulations. You've got big tunnels channeling air underneath a car that's running very close to the ground and effectively has a skirt created by the floor edge that's sealing the air in. This combination is what makes the car susceptible to porpoising. His comments suggest that no matter what the FIA do with the rules, while the ground effect is in the sport, the bouncing will happen. This does add more weight to the question, should the FIA have made rule changes to address porpoising in the first place? We'll come back to that in a second, but there was something else interesting that Blandin said in his interview on the Aston Martin website. Every F1 car experiences some degree of oscillation, but with the current regulations, due to the aerodynamic load and the variation in that aerodynamic load, this oscillation is more pronounced. You use the same tools, wind tunnel, CFD cluster, software, but it's all about how you extract the data and how you use it. Simulating the problem is complicated. There aren't many tools that can do that. On a computational side, you can't predict it with normal software. His comments seem to suggest that Aston Martin might be in the process of building modeling software more specific to the current ground effect systems that is capable of considering the variables involved in ground effect aerodynamics. Maybe they already have it. The reason the teams missed porpoising in the design process for 2022 was because their simulations literally didn't show it up. If they have, that could be a huge advantage to them. So what about that technical rule change and whether it was warranted? Well, now we know the teams don't think it will stop the problem, and the FIA don't think it will stop the problem, it does kind of seem stupid. Before the FIA introduced it, one team that was very against the change was Alpine. They had the problem at the start of the season, but very quickly mitigated it with upgrades and performance trade-offs. Talking about this, Alpine team principal Otmar Safnauer said, "We always made those trade-off decisions on car setup, especially early on to get the car to a place where porpoising wasn't an issue for the drivers. And that's where we raced it. We had a scale of 1 to 10 and we really never wanted to be above a 3. 10 being unbearable and 1 being nothing. So we wanted to be in the region of 3 and 4. We would manipulate the car setup to make sure that the drivers were okay. But that always came at the expense of performance. Maybe some of the others didn't want to do that. They saw better routes. This thinly veiled shot at Mercedes is a good point. Alpine made sacrifices to performance to protect their drivers' health, something Mercedes point-blank refused to do, choosing instead to pressure the FIA through the press until they made a change. The FIA made the change, but in the long run, it doesn't seem like it's going to make any difference. In 2023, the teams are going to have to follow Alpine's example and make sacrifices because porpoising is going to be back, despite the rule changes. Do you expect teams to struggle with bouncing from the start of the season? Or will it creep in as the teams find more downforce throughout the season? Let us know your opinions in the comments down below. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe in preparation for the 2023 season. Until next time, drive safe and bye for now.